Yo, what's up, y'all? We out here. It's Buff Missionary back in these streets, and as you can tell, the sun is out. Vampire vibes are done. We out here trying to get in the morning, and morning, it's noon, but at least some point earlier in the day, as opposed to 2 a.m., which is kind of ridiculous when the mind doesn't really want to work as well as it should. But we out here, we're going to jump back in the word here. Galatians, we are in chapter 4, studying through, and we're looking at it through the lens and the mentality of 4 questions. 1, what might God be saying to me in this passage? 2, how does this passage touch or intersect with my life? 3, what does any idea that stands out have to do with my relationship with God? And 4, what is God's invitation to me in these verses? Like, subscribe, and share. We're going through the entire book of Galatians, and we're just doing it. I'm not out here to say that I understand every single verse and everything that's in the Bible, because I don't. And in fact, a couple of the verses that are here in today's, I skimmed over it before turning on the camera, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So we'll see how it goes there. Hopefully we can still gain something from it, at least in the big picture of the study here. But yeah, we're going to be looking at this right here. And the context of this section is called Fears for the Church. And we did the first 2 verses in this section in the last video, verses 8 and 9 of chapter 4. And I'm not sure how many verses we'll do today. I am feeling a little bit more awake and alive, so we may just go with it and see how it goes. But, we will start from verse 10 and we'll go from there. So anyways, verse 10, you observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid for you, verse 11. I am afraid for you, lest I have labored for you in vain. Now, this was the immediate section that I stopped at when I was looking at verses 8 and 9, and I was like, what is he talking about here? I don't really get it. But almost in the moment, like right now, I'm thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't have separated it when I was looking at it from 8 and 9. 8 and 9, 10 and 11, maybe they all go together. They are, after all part of this section, Fears for the Church. So let me go back and reread 8 and 9 and combine it with 10 and 11 and see if it gives us a better picture. But then indeed, when you did not know God, you served those which by nature are not gods. But now after you have known God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you turn again to the weak and beggarly elements to which you desire again to be in bondage? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid for you, lest I have labored for you in vain. Okay. Now, contextually, when you think about it, the calendar back in the Jewish time actually revolved around the seasons, right? And even when we look at our calendar today, we kind of group it. We have the summer, we have the winter, we have the spring, we have the fall. But those seasons are kind of split up by what nature is doing on a surface level, right? We call it winter because everything is like dead. We have the spring because everything springs back to life. We have the summer because of the heat, and we have the fall because leaves fall, all that kind of stuff. So on a surface level, we are paying attention to what's actually happening in nature to give us these categories for the seasons. But what did that mean for them back then? Well, when you think about it, I can't remember where it is. I think it's in Ecclesiastes or Lamentations or something. It talks about a season for this and a season for that and a season for that. And one of the things that we really find is that the entire economy and the calendar and the social life revolved around the harvest. So you see this idea of the harvest when it's fully ripe. We see these themes popping up all throughout Scripture because that was their context. That was their life. That's how they understood things. So even when you look at the feasts that God gave the Israelites, the Hebrew people, to celebrate, a lot of these were based on different times in the harvest calendar, which is how they operated their life. There was a time for sowing. There was a time for reaping. There was a time that was meant for the growing. There was time for the gathering. And a lot of these feasts, a lot of these times and days and seasons and years. You even had one, the year of Jubilee, where it was something to happen every several years, every 7 years, and I think every 50 years, something like that. So you had all of these things that were kind of set based on the calendar, based on what was actually happening in nature, based on the economy of the people at that time. That was their context. And again, when we think about this now in the lens of verses 8 and 9, what's happening? Paul is expressing a fear because people who are exposed now to how God is redefining or recontextualizing the law, Paul is worried that they're going to go back to the things that aren't God's and ignore the true God. And immediately after he makes this point, he talks about being in bondage to these things. And then he says times and seasons and years and months. So don't quote me on it. First of all, that's my disclaimer. All right. I put it out there. But it seems like you might have had people that were so caught up into the calendar, so caught up into the times, and am I doing this at the right time? Am I doing that at the right time? Are we on time for all of these things? They might have gotten so caught up in that regiment that they forgot about just sticking with God, and they made the calendar, they made the schedule their God instead, and they were bound to that, in bondage to that, as Paul is saying here. And he says, I'm afraid for you lest I have labored in vain. Now, when you put it like that, we might not deal on like a harvest or a crop growing calendar in our lives today, but how much of a God is our schedule to us? We have to be here at this time. We have to wake up at this time. We have to do this thing at this exact time. And if we do those things, we have a good day. If I get to Sabbath school at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning, this is a Saturday morning, I'm here in the office recording this video. If I'm in church right at 11 a.m. on the dot, it's a good day. I'm doing what I need to because the schedule determines my spirituality. There's no room on this day for anything else but just staying in this mentality and staying in church mode. You know, when I was growing up, one of the things that turned me off to the church faster than anything else was the fact that all we did for most Sabbaths was sit in church. It was Sabbath school. We had to be there at 9 in the morning, which meant we had to wake up super early on a Saturday morning, which I hated. We were in church from Sabbath school to divine service, which started at 11, and being in a black church that went till probably 1 sometimes or later. And it was the absolute worst. I hated it because now you're sitting there. I already had to wake up mad early and barely had breakfast because we had to get to church on time. Now I got to sit here and wait for lunch. My stomach's growling. I'm a little tired because I woke up so early. I'm not trying to pay attention to this sermon, and I got to wait till mad late in the afternoon to eat. And then after lunch, what do? We sit around. The folks will talk like spiritual things, debate different stuff. The kids, we would just be running around the church doing dumb stuff, whatever. But we had another program in the afternoon, 5 o'clock. We had AY. And it was hard for me to appreciate those things because in my mind, it felt like the schedule dominated everything. And there was no room for the spirituality outside of that. As long as we were keeping the schedule, we're good Christians. That was my perception. I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying that was my perception and how I related to those things. But it seemed like the schedule became the God. Whether it was sunset at Friday is when everything had to cut off. And then it was, an hour before that, you should be winding down and making sure that at sunset, you're right here for worship at this time. These are not bad things, mind you. I think it's good to have a worship and a fellowship with God to bring in the Sabbath. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it's great to spend time in fellowship with people who are fellow believers on God's holy day. I believe that. But if the schedule becomes the God and you forget about God, then I think there's an issue. And I'm speaking generally. Like I said, I'm not accusing my church or my family of doing this. I'm just saying what it felt like and how I related to it, because I didn't have a relationship. I didn't have an actual relationship with God. So I could only see it through the lens of what am I being made to do? See what I'm saying? So it's interesting. Those things end up keeping you bondage, because again, now I'm looking at the clock and I have all these standards set in place for what is this supposed to look like. And if I'm doing it this way, I'm good. And if I do it anything outside of this, it's wrong. But here's the crazy thing. Speaking of sunset and the way that we kind of treated it, and sundown, how it was like, oh man, you can't wait for the Sabbath to be over because you want to go do something now. The Sabbath being so restrictive, even here in our American context. I had the privilege of going to Israel on an archaeological trip. Shout out to Dr. Hazel, his family, his group, his crew. I was a part of that group in 2017, the summer. We were there for like 6 to 8 weeks. It was amazing. I loved Israel. We got to go all over the place, Jerusalem, the Dead Sea, Red Sea. We were out in Jordan, in the dunes, Wadi Rum. Oh my goodness. I need to go back. Bar none, I need to go back. But the way that we were in Jerusalem at the Western Wall, which is near the Temple Mount, where of course I forget what it's called. The Dome of the Rock is what we call it, but I forget its Arabic name. But we were there by the Western Wall on a Friday evening, getting ready to see how the Jewish people would, or the Israelites would, bring in the Sabbath. And it totally changed the way that I viewed the Sabbath. These people were out here dancing in circles. They were singing. They were having a good time. It looked like it was like a celebration. I never felt like bringing in the Sabbath at home was a celebration. It just felt like a regiment, something that we were supposed to do because it was time to do it. But seeing these people and the joy that they had, I'm not going to lie, it made me feel uncomfortable. I had been raised a certain way to think of this thing as in a certain way my entire life. And when I saw people happy that the Sabbath was coming, when I saw people dancing and celebrating that the Sabbath was coming, that was foreign to me. And the irony is, the Bible being written mostly in Hebrew and experienced through a lot of Hebrew people, and seeing how Hebrew and Israelite people respond to this and what it means to them, how they interpret this, and yet myself in America looking at the Bible interpreted in a completely different way. And I think their way would be a little bit more accurate, to be honest, at least as far as that stuff is concerned. But it's crazy how we take the things and we read it and we devoid it of the context, and we end up with something that's just dry, skeleton, bare bones, and punishing. We end up focusing on just observing the days and the months and the seasons and the years. We make these things the God and we forget about God. It's interesting. And Paul says, man, I'm afraid for you, lest I have labored in vain. Imagine going through your entire life feeling like this whole spiritual experience is just about meeting the right times and dates. And oddly enough, a lot of Christians do that with date setting and trying to predict when Jesus will come back. They're so focused on these things and they look for the signs of the times. We do that in Adventism a lot, where these things become the driver and we forget about the relationship. You can't even say that God is a passenger anymore. Like, yeah, his name is on the side of the car, but he ain't in it. We driving something else, chasing the times. And we make those things our God over God. And it shouldn't be that way. And it's a scary thing, because again, thinking back in the context of what Paul is writing here, the standard is something that you can see and it's easy to measure up against. It's easy to say this is the time to do this and that's the time to do this. But when you talk about the tangibleness of seeing the relationship with God, it's not always there. You don't want to base it on feelings. You hear people talk about that. So what are you basing it on? If you're not going to base it on something that you can kind of feel and something that you can relate to, well, then it automatically defaults to a checklist. So these are the things that I can see and can follow. So these are the things I do. And then I forget about the other things, the deeper matters, which I may not always be able to see or make tangible, and forget about those things. There's a legit fear there that we could be doing this. And I think as far as individuals in our religious experience, we need to be willing to evaluate that and self-reflect and see whether or not we're still trying to relate to God, or if we're trying to relate to times and months and days and seasons and years, or other standards, as opposed to the God behind them, or the God who gives us the proper perspective of those things. It's interesting. But yeah, I think it's a legit fear. And as I'm looking down at the text here, this is only a couple verses, but I think we'll stop here. This is long enough for this video. Kind of changes gears, talking about different things, moving on to the next few verses. But I really want to emphasize, man, it should give us cause for pause if we are so focused on all these standards that we're missing the view of God. It's like we get so caught up in the shadows and the impact of the sun, and we never look to the sun. You know, there's so many different illustrations that you can have for that, but we shouldn't lose sight of the sun. And I think that spirituality and religion can be such a much more beautiful experience if we keep focus on God. And I think you'll find that it leads to a lot more openness and just freedom than just trying to live up to that standard, because the law brings the curse. It's the changeless promise that brings life. And it's not that we're trying to fight the two against each other, but realizing how the promise informs the law. And once we do that, I think it says there's neither slave nor free. You're all one. I think that we come to a better understanding of who God is and how he wants to relate to us if we stop trying to focus just on a standard and focus on the relationship. How do I relate to God? So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. I like that. Didn't expect to reflect on some of those things growing up, but it kind of fit. So definitely want to make sure that in my personal experience, as I go forward, I'm focusing more on the relationship. And I'm not saying it's easy, because it's a lot easier to focus on a standard and things that you can see. But I want to make that effort to focus on the relationship and let that drive how I see the things that the relationship is asking of me. I think that's going to be a whole lot more practical and useful and beneficial for my spiritual experience, as opposed to just summing it up to a bunch of rules. And if I meet the rules, then I'm good, but I can't because I'm not really capable of it, so it's always going to suck. I don't want a spiritual experience like that. So, hey man, that's me. But yo, we out here, buff missionary in these streets in the day with the sun. I love it. We out here. And I'm about to actually go get outside, even though it's only like 40 degrees right now. But we're going to go enjoy this sun. Haven't seen it in a few days. Not just because I've been recording videos at night, but also because Michigan tends to have gray skies for seasons and years and days and months and weeks on end. So we're going to get out here. We're going to mix it up and enjoy it a little bit. But hey, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you. Like, subscribe, and share. And I will catch y'all on the next one. Peace.